Beginning current Daf Mesechtes Gitin Daf Test, we begin on the bottom of Chesma Beis, 4 lines up at the bottom of the Yomid, where we continue with one of the classic Talmudic discussions of the sugya of Palgin and Dibura, which we began the conversation in the previous Daf by quoting a Braisa. Said if a slave brings his document of emancipation, and it says, "You and my assets are acquired to you," so he acquires himself, because that he's believed for, but he does not acquire the assets because that you need to have kimishtaris. On that, the question was posed: what happens if you say kol nechsai kenuyin lach? On the one hand, that includes him and the nechasim, but again, he could acquire himself, but he's not believed regarding when he says b'fanei necht regarding the nechasim. So the machlekes Abaye and Rava. Abaye says it's all or nothing. He says that since you're not going to acquire the assets, you're not going to acquire yourself. Rava said no, that you're going to acquire yourself and you're not going to acquire the nechasim. And Abaye is going to respond to him. The Gemara is going to respond right now to Rava and says, obviously you're saying it based on the Talmudic principle of Palgina Dibur, meaning although the guy said one phrase, all my nechasim are acquired to you, you're spalting, you're splitting it, you're splicing, and you're saying, you're not going to get the nechasim, the actual money, the actual assets, the house and the yacht and the boat. You're not going to get those things because that you need to have like kim shtagas. You have to have that validated through two witnesses. But you'll get yourself because for that, just like Be'isha, she could bring her own get and she's believed to say b'fanei nechtem. So to the Eved will acquire himself. But that depended on can you actually take one statement and say for half we will believe you and half we won't. That says that's the Gemara we're going to continue regarding. Can you say this concept of Pagina Dibura? Just corresponds to Kalzik and Cheskel. Turn to Daf Yomi. Pushing to today's Daf. Some of these discussing today's Daf are this concept, like we said, Pagina Dibura. That you have one Dibur, you have one speech, you have one statement, and we're going to split it. That for half we'll say it works and half we don't. That seems to be a machlekes Tanoim. Irur, which is the concept of that. We're concerned about the document. If someone's going to come and contest, and the Gemara is going to explain who and how many people is this ir. Then with the halacha of ein yochel loim b'fanei nechtav, what does it mean that if someone can't say b'fanei nechtav, what the halacha is that we're going to be mekayim b'chaisamav? Who's that type of personality? The next Mishnah discusses shabi Gitin noshim the shiur avadim, the similarities that the divorce documents of women are similar to the emancipation documents of slaves. And the Gemara in Amud Beis discusses if you have witnesses that don't know how to read and don't know how to sign, what do you do for them? How do you make it easier for them to be able to know what's going on and to sign? So we put in terms of concepts in today's daf, a shlich lehilacha, which a shlich lehilacha is an agent from the husband to go deliver the get. So that takes effect when it's actually given because he's an extension of the husband. Shlich like a bal, on the other hand, is an agent from the woman generally, where she points someone to be her agent. So it takes effect as soon as the shlich accepts it, because he's an extension of the woman, and when she receives it is when the gerushin happens. The well-known concept of zachan l'adam shlei b'fanav, that you can merit for a person even when they're not there, not in front of them. But ein chav l'adam el b'fanav, you can only create a liability for a person only when they're there. In other words, when it's with their understanding, not without their awareness. And ha'omer ten get zel ishti. Related to that is if someone says, give this get to my wife, if he wants to back out, he can back out, because since it's a chayv la'adam, it's a liability for her, so it's not going to be considered as the shliach being zeicha for her. He can back out whenever he wants to. So we begin the current daf Chesem Beis, 4 lines up at the bottom of the Amid, where the Gemara had brought him a machlekes Abaye and Rava, which the Gemara is going to spell it out clearly now, but regarding if Palgini Dibura, we split one statement, or loy pagini dibur, one statement cannot be divided. Abaye says, no, you said kol nechsai, it's either kol nechsai or not. You tell me that he can't get the nechasim because you're not believed to bring a document saying you're getting all his stuff without it being validated. Now for yourself, if we said two different statements, atzmacha v'nechsai, then those are two different statements. We'll believe you on atzmacha but not nechsai. But you say kol nechsai, we can't believe you, says Abaye, on the part of the nechasim, so then we can't believe you either on the part of yourself. Whereas Rava says, no, pagini dibura. We'll split it, and we'll say you're one thing, and the nechasim is another thing, even though it was one statement. That's the machlekes. So now, Amalei Ravadi B'Masna Rava says, come on, wait a second, this is a machlekes Tanoim. Who are you like? You are like Kireb Shimon, the Amma Pagin Dibura, who says that you could split a statement into two. What's the source of this? They're done like Lina Mishnah Mesechtes Peah. Someone writes all his entire estate, his trustworthy bill, his slave, I don't know what a slave name would be, but whatever Tom would be, right? So he says, all my nechasim, he says the words, kol nichsai nesuin lach, all my assets are given to you. So says the Tanakama, Yotze ben Chayrin. So he goes out a free person because, like Rashi says very simply, he's also obviously part of the nechasim, and all the other nechasim he also acquires. So basically everything from the master's passing away, or when he's leaving, he's going away, whatever it is, he acquires everything, including himself. Now, shiur karka, here's where it gets a little bit more complicated. Shiur karka kolshu. What happens if he leaves over, meaning he has this $1 billion estate, but there's this one little property that he leaves out from this document that he's giving the slave, which Rashi says, karka is not necessarily property, real estate, as the Gemara Babasa says, Nafkuf Nun Alf, but he leaves something out. He says everything but a certain piece of property. Then actually, lo yotze b'chayrin, the slave is not going to go out as a free man. Why is that? So, because the first case that we mentioned, where he didn't mention anything about leaving anything out of the estate, so we don't say that he left anything out, and we say that, okay, when he's saying all my nechasim, it's everything including the slave, and everything's going to the slave. But over here in this case, where he was agreeable to leave stuff out, we say, it's a hard concept to understand exactly, we say that he also left out the slave. He told him, all my nechasim are going to you. That's on regarding to all the other nechasim. But really he wanted to, for him. He really wanted to flatter him. And he wasn't coming to free him even. And how do we know that? Because if he really wanted to, he would have been explicit and he would have said, you and my nechasim are being acquired to you. He didn't say that. He said kol nechsai. Now, kol nechsai means everything, yes, but he also left over something else. By doing that, leaving over that other thing, we'll see in the Gemara shortly exactly what really is the svara. So it's hard to understand exactly why that would be when he left only that piece of property. What does that have to do with the Eved? Yeah, like the words of Rashi is, Kivin the nachas l'shiura. Once he's leaving stuff out, we say he left out the slave also. So you got nothing. Because he doesn't go free and he didn't acquire anything. He's still a slave of the master. That's what the Tanakama holds. Shimon Omer, and this is the main point that Ravada Bamasa wants to tell Rava. Shimon says, as Gitin Daf Testament Aleph, no, he's always going to be a free person. Because, like Rashi explains, what do you mean? What he revealed, he revealed. He said, I'm leaving over a small piece of property. But he didn't reveal. He didn't say he's leaving over the Eved. No reason for us to say that he's not going out a free man. There's all my nechasim, which includes all his slaves and all his properties and all his boats and everything. Until he says the following phrase. This phrase is already more problematic, says even Reb Shimon. If he says, Kol nechsai nesun l'pleini abdi, if he says, oh, my whole estate is given to that person, my slave, chutz mi echad meriba shebehen, except from one myriad of my property. So, as Rashi explains, he's saying unspecifically, I'm leaving over something. He doesn't say what he's leaving over. So there we say that 1 billionth or whatever it is of his property he's leaving over is the Eved. And he's so insignificant, like 1 out of 10,000 that he has in his property, even though he's worth more. That's what Rabbi Shimon says. Okay, then you're saying he's leaving over epis. That epis could be the slave. But right, it's just chanifa. It's just flattery. It says you're getting everything. Right, but I'm saying, but it's that's what flattery is. You don't get anything, mechanfent, you know. But according to Rashi, Taisa disagrees with Rashi. But according to Rashi, the main point that he wants to say is like this: for the fact that Reb Shimon said Lo ben chayrin, that he's always going to be a free person, what we're telling you is like this: it doesn't make a difference where he acquires the other nechasim with him. In other words, for example, let's say he specified what he was leaving over. Let's say he said, I have a property on 42nd Street that on 52nd Street, whatever it is, I want to leave over that piece of property. Now he's going to acquire himself and all the other nechasim except for what was left over. And if, let's say, he said that he defined what property it is, so he would get everything else besides that property. Now, it doesn't make a difference where he's not acquiring other nechasim. What does that mean? Let's say, until he says a few problems with the way Rashi says, but this is what Rashi says is that, let's say it doesn't mention the property that he left over. Let's say it says except for a certain tract of a size of land. Says Rashi, he's not going to acquire any karka now. Because every single piece of land, you could say maybe that's the one that he left over. So he won't be getting anything but himself. Even so, he's going out as a free person. Why? Why does he go out as a free person? Because he's not a piece of karka. He's not. When the guy said that shiur karka kosher, the Tanna Kama says he doesn't go free, which is hard to understand why that would be. But he said since he's leaving over stuff, he probably left him out also. Shimon says no. He's always going to be free until he says 1/10,000. That can mean anything. That can mean the slave too. But when he says karka, so Rashi's medek from the word la'olam, he's always going to be free, meaning whether he said which piece of property, which then you will be getting other properties and yourself, or even if he didn't say which property. So then you won't get any property. You won't get any nechasim. Let's say there's only real estate and the guy and the slave. You won't get anything. He'll only get himself. He'll still go free. Because he's not a piece of property. And he wasn't left out. So obviously, you say pagin and dibura. Why? Because what did he say? He said, kol nichsai, all my properties are going to you. And guess what? He's only walking away with himself. Oh, so therefore, says Rav Adaba Masna to Rava, you also, Rava, that you said that in the case of kol nichsai, that all my properties are going to be kenuin lach, that he acquires himself, but not in the chasim. Oh, must be you're like Reb Shimon. That's the simple understanding. The way Rashi says is the way the Ravad Maas is telling Rava that you're obviously like Reb Shimon who holds plagin and dibur. And the Tanna Kama doesn't say that. He says, no, you're not going to go out free. Once you're not getting all the properties, you're not going to get yourself either. But says the Gemara, but what's the problem? Okay, let's say it's like Reb Shimon. Problem is, but Rabbi Nachman says, even though Rabbi Yisi praised this opinion of Rabbi Shimon, which is the opinion of the Palgina Dibura, that's not the halacha. Halacha is Kreb Meir that says that you don't go out free. Which are trying to learn the Brisa. This Brisa is actually a little misleading, meaning it's even though in the Brisa it says that he praises it, as you see in this Brisa that Rabbi Yisi praises the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, but that's not the halacha. Where do we see that he praised it? When the words of Rabbi Shimon were said in front of Rabbi Yisi, he recited the pasuk in Mishlei, Sfasayim Yishak, which Rashi translates that to mean that the lips should kiss. Meishiv Dvarim Nechaychim is someone who responds with appropriate words. Taisa says a little bit different. When someone says a good word, and those around them, they kiss their lips to each other because they're quiet. They don't know what to respond. So their lips are kissing each other, and that's what Mefarshim say, because you don't say Sfasayim Yishak, you just say Yishak. Sfasayim is denoting that the lips are kissing each other, that, you have nothing to say. So although he praised it, he said, what a good pshat Reb Shimon is saying, but Lamai says not the halacha. So the question on Rabbi is, you want to say by the case of Kol Nichsei Knuin Lach, when the Eved comes from Medina Zayam, and he brings his get shichur, that you're saying that he acquires himself, but even though he does not acquire the chasam, because he's only believing on himself, but not regarding the rest of the state. That's like Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon, that's not the halacha, but I'm passing like Reb Shimon. So how could you say Pagini Dibura that you split it when we see that Reb Shimon is not the halacha? So on that says the Gemara to answer for Rava. Mi Omer Rav Nachman Hachi. Did Rav Nachman really say what you just said in his name? That we passing like Reb Shimon, we passing like Reb Meir, who's the Tanna Kama, not like Reb Shimon, because we're not Pagina Dibura, we don't split up a statement into two. But that's not the case, because V'amar Rav Yisib Yommi Omer Rav Nachman. We have another teaching of Rav Nachman that says as follows: Shchiv Merat, a dying person, Shakasav Kanachasav La'abdai, who he's like, okay, says Frank, you were a great slave all these years, and I want to reward you. I want you to take over. I don't have a friend in the world. I want you to take everything I have. V'amad, and guess what? He survives. He thought for sure he was a dead man. So the halacha is like this: Chayzer ben Chasim, he gets to take back all his property, but ve'enu chayzer be'evet, doesn't get the slave back. The slave is a free man. What's the reason? So the Gemara explains. Chayzer ben Chasim, the reason why he could retract on the properties is because this is what's called a matna shchimerahu. It's a gift of a dying person, which the Gemara Babasar Kaf Mem Vav Beis says that he takes back all the gifts that he gave because it was only obviously on the condition that he's dying. If he survives, so there's no reason for us to give it to those people. But he cannot take back the slave. Why not? Because he's already been known as a free man. Everyone's like, oh, Frank, they're making a big party. His boss, Bob is passing away. But it's like, oh, they're celebrating. They're already drinks on me, whatever. So you cannot enslave him anymore. Text discusses why not. What I mean, it was only with that understanding upon him. But he doesn't. He's going to remain free, but he won't get the estate. Wait a second. That's Palgin and Dibura. He told them, all my nechasim are going to you, and guess what's ended up happening? He's only getting himself and not the nechasim. And that's Rav Nachman. But you just told me Rav Nachman says Allah is like a man alak Rabbi Shimon, and that's why you're asking on Rava that we don't say Palgin Dibura. So what did Rav Nachman hold? You say Palgin, you don't say Palgin. So Elam Rav Ashi says, and this answers the question why it's not difficult on Rava. Hassam over there, where Rav Nachman said Allah is like Remeir, which is what we were asking on Rava from, which we see that he doesn't agree with Reb Shimon that you can be ben chayrin. That reasoning is not because we don't say Pagin Dibura. Not true. Because even when you mention which piece of property you're leaving out, there's no Pagin Dibura. Because the guy's getting all of the property, it's just except for this, so that's not. Still, Reb Meir says he's not going to go free. It's not based on the principle of that you don't say Paginon. So what's that? What's that idea? Rather, time the reason Mishum de Lav Kreis Gituhu. It's because it's not considered as a krisus, as a separation of a get. Because by a woman, when she gets divorced, the pasuk says in Dvarim Chavdal, it has to be a sefer krisus, a book of severance, totally separated. Now, Shechruri Avadim, freeing a slave, we learn out a Gzera Shava, where it says by the get because of law sefer krisus. Shevchet Kanan says Eichuv Shalinitan law. So both of them says law. So we need to have, just like by a get, it has to be a sefer krisus, has to be total separation. So too by the evet. Now, the way Rashi explains this to me is that since you could say that we left out the slave, why? Because you see, he's leaving stuff out. And this is where Rashi, I think he alludes to the main idea, is that you didn't mention the evet in the gift. He didn't write to him, you're right. What are you going to ask me? Say, well, he didn't leave him out. Yeah, but he didn't insert him either. So the fact that we're leaving stuff out and you didn't mention him, says Rashi, the way he explains the Gemara's answer, that's not a full-fledged krisus. That's not a full-fledged severance because you're not saying clearly that you're letting him go. Now, but where nothing was left out, like over here in the case of the shchimera, and the dying person, there was nothing left out. That's a krisus to let go the slave. And since he's free for one moment, as long as the guy didn't become healthy yet again, so he can't back out anymore because he really got everything. It was a full-fledged krisus. It's just a technicality in halacha that when the shchimera survives, he gets it back. But before he gets it back, everything was going to the slave. It just gets sucked back to the owner, to the dying person when he survives. And so too by the teaching of Rava. When you have a slave who brings his get, and on the get it says, everything of mine is going to you. That's a total krisus. Now, although you're right, technically he's not going to get in the chasam because you need to have kiyum shtagos, you have to validate the documentation, but that's a technicality. But nothing was left out. There was no shiur. But himself he's going to acquire. Why? Wait a second. It's all or nothing. No, you don't say all or nothing. You do say Pagin and Dibura. You say Pagin and Dibura, then why don't we pass it like Rabbi Shimon? Why pass it like Rabbi Meir? No, we don't not pass it like Rabbi Shimon because we don't hold the Pagin Dibura. We hold the Pagin Dibura. So why do we pass on like Rabbi Meir, not like Rabbi Shimon? That's because it's not a krisus, because you didn't do a total severance. Again, it's two different things. They're very similar, fine point, but the Gemara is saying they're two different ideas. One is, are you totally letting him go? And one is, okay, when you say a statement, do we have to be all or nothing? The Gemara is answering for Rava, not like Abai. You don't have to be all or nothing. You could take a statement, you could split into two. But just make sure that but you're totally letting him go. When you're leaving on, that was the case of Meir versus Rabbi Shimon, when you're saying, yeah, except for this, even you said which property, Meir still says the Ev is not going free. Why not? That's nothing to do with Palginan. That's not Palginan. You told him, all my estate except for this property, you're going to get. So why would Meir say that you wouldn't go free? So that's what Rashi explains, 2 points. First of all, the nachas l'shiur. You see, he's leaving stuff out. And he also didn't mention explicitly the Eved. With those two factors, it's not a full-fledged krisis, and that's why he's not going to go free. And that's the halacha of Rabbi Meir, and therefore it's not a difficulty on Rava. Could be that we do say Palgin Dibura, and even so, we would pass on like Rabbi Meir, not like Rabbi Shimon. Now, we continue on halacha of the Mishnah. We said that when you're coming in Eretz Yisrael, which we said in Eretz Yisrael, you don't say b'fanei nechtam. So, which that was the whole point, to prevent the husbands, whoever it is, coming to contest. Said the Mishnah, okay, im yesh lav eirin, if there are people who contest and say it is invalid, so then then you'll validate it with the signatures, meaning like Rashi says, either the witnesses themselves will testify that they signed on it, or you'll have other witnesses who recognize their signatures, and then there won't be any problem, because in Eretz Yisrael we know the Bekin Lishma, and also with Kim Shtaris, you'll validate the documentation itself. But says the Gemara, Iru Kama, how many people are contesting this document of the get that you have to be Mekayim b'chasamav? If you say the contesting is one person, that can't be. Because Rabbi Birchan says, according to everyone, contesting is not less than two, because if you have a chazak of a shtar, you're not going to say less than two witnesses that there's a reyes over here. So ve'el ir trey. So what are you going to say? No, we're talking about two people are contesting it, then you'll have to be Mekayim b'chasamav. Says, wait a second. If it's two people contesting the documentation, saying, this is a forgery, and then two people are going to be Mekayim it, well, that's trey v'treinu. Then it's 2 against 2. My chazda samchahani, why do you see fit to rely on the ones who are being Mekayim it? Samchahani, maybe rely on the ones who are saying that it's not good, that invalidate the chasima, which, because Taisus explains that the reason for that is because ultimately she has a chazka seishasish. So the chazaka really is working with the ones that are saying it's not a good get, because that's the chazaka. So why relying on the ones who are saying that it's valid, rely on the ones who are saying it's not valid? So what's the case talking about? If it's ir dechad, there's no such thing as ir of one person. If it's ir of two people, then how is kim b'chasamav helping? It's 2 against 2. They cancel each other out. So the Rebbe says the Gemara, it's ir de bal. It's when the husband is contesting, which Taisus, according to the way some explain it, will say that it's meaning and of the lekuches, because it seems to be of the plural, this ir, and which the woman's now going to come to collect with her ksuba from the lekuches, as brought in the Yerushalmi. So their contesting is valid because they're the subject of this collection, and therefore that's the case for Tomah. So it's not 2 against 2, because it's not aidus, the husband's not an aid, but he himself could contest and say it's not true, and then 2 witnesses will be believed to say that this is a valid document, and therefore that will be the kiyum, the chasamav, when it's brought in Eretz Yisrael. Now the halacha, the next Mishnah continues regarding this opening theme. The first Mishnah was the Daf Beis, now Daf Tes, continuing this theme about Hamevi get, title of this parak, someone brings the get regarding saying b'fanei nechtav. So the first Mishnah said, yes, if you bring it from Medina Sayam, you have to say in front of me is written in front of the sign. But says the Mishnah, maybe get Medina Sayam, and this was one of the questions we had asked on Rabbah, that it seems like the primary idea is not like he said for Lishma, it's rather because of Kim Chesamav, because it says in our Mishnah, if someone brings a get from overseas, we can't say in front of me what's written in front of the sign, which he doesn't explain why can't he say that. But in Yeshlav Eidim, so good. If there's witnesses on the document, you validate it with the signatures. Now, Echad Gitin Nashim, Echad Shechur Avadim. Now, our Mishnah introduces that this halacha that we were saying up until now, which the theme of our Masechta, of our parak, of that of Gitin Nashim, applies equally to Echad Shechur Avadim. as we mentioned previously on this Amud, La Meisha. Also, the same halacha is applied to the emancipation of a slave. That Shavu L'Melech L'Mevi. They have the same halacha as when you're bringing it and bringing it back, that you have to say B'fanei Nechtav. And this is This is one of the ways that a get of a woman is going to be similar to that of a shiur of an Eved. So first the Gemara explains what's this opening case of my inu yochel loimer. You told me that if you bring a get from the Yam, we said you're supposed to say B'fanei Nechtav, but Amr says if you can't, okay, you'll be Mekam B'chasam. What's that case that he cannot? We already mentioned this previously on Daf Dalam Beis. If you think it's a deaf mute who he can't speak, who you think, well, he can't even bring it. He can't be a shliach to even bring it. Because no, learn the Mishnah later on the Chav Gimel and after it says Akol Ksher and Lavis again. Everyone's valid to bring the get, except for deaf, mute, and mentally deranged in the mind because they don't have intelligence, and therefore they're not considered as valid agents for a gerush and for a divorce. So let alone you're telling me that he can't say that will be okay, but he can't even be a shliach. So Rabbi Yisrael says, actually, we're talking about where he gave it to her when he was mentally sane. He had all his capacity as a shliach. But he didn't get a chance to say the words until he became a deaf mute. So he was a shliach, but at the same time, he was einu yochel loimer. As Tais already been medayik, we said on Daf Daled that it means he inherently cannot say it. Not just someone that didn't say it, inherently cannot say it, which is a cheresh. So he was able to be the shliach, but he still didn't end up saying the words. Like Taisa said, that you obviously see that teich kedei dibur doesn't have to be mamish the second you give it. You have some time frame to say the words, and boom, he became a cheresh literally at that moment. Maybe had some type of herb he had on his way traveling, and he's got stuck on a trip, whatever, and he's toast, and he became a cheresh. And that's the case they're talking about. That okay, b'mekayim b'chasama. Now the Mishnah then continued and said, "Echa Gitin Nashim." Whether we're talking about a get of a woman, when we're talking about the emancipation of a slave, they have the same halacha of Melech Umevi, that when you bring it from Medina Sayyam to Eretz Yisrael or back, you would have to say B'fanei Nechtav or B'fanei Nechtav. So elaborating on this theme, talking about learning the Brisa. In 3 ways, a get of a woman is similar to a shiur of an Eved, as we're going to explain in the coming Mishnah. What are the 3 ways? So shavu l'melech u'lemevi. So they're the same, that they both require the declaration of b'fanei nechtam when they bring it from overseas. And number 2 is v'chol get, which really the word get means any document, not necessarily a get of a isha. The first thesis in the Masechta explained, get could also mean any document. I mean, it's like another word for shtar. Any shtar, sheyesh lav eid kuti, that has a kuti, that has a non-Jew that signed on it, his apostle is going to be invalid. Chutz migitei nashim b'shechur avadim, except for a get for a woman and shechur avadim, which later on the paragraph is going to explain what's the reason for that. Why is that different than all other shtaris that are puzzle with a eid kuti, and here it's going to be kosher? That's the second way that they're similar. And the third one is v'chol hashtaris as Gitin Daf ha'olam ba'arkoyah shel oibdei kechavim. All the documents that are done through a court of non-Jews, and although that those who are signing inside of them are also non-Jews, they're going to be valid. Why would they be valid? So Rashi explains, because of the halachic concept of dina de machusa dina, which is that ultimately the law of the land is law, and even though the one who's giving and receiving are Jews, we say that the secular documents and those deeds are going to be valid. Chutz, and this is the third thing that Gitin Nashim is similar to Shechur Abadim, Chutz Gitin Nashim, except for the get of a woman, because, like Rashi explains, the non-Jews are what's called La B'nei Krisis Ninu. More later on the next daf is going to tell us, and Tosfos goes through in great detail to explain how many flaws there are with a non-Jew. One of them is that the ones who execute the get have to be themselves able to be in the category of divorce, which is a Jewish concept. And non-Jews are not applicable in the category of Gitin and Kedushin. Now, regarding monetary cases, Dinin is one of the Shev Mitzvah B'nei Noach. So, yeah, a regular monetary document will be valid in the secular court. But a get that's written in the secular court has no validity. And the same thing is v'shechur avadim, emancipating a slave, because, like Rashi explains, any biblical invalidation, we compare a shiur of a shiur to get isha, because we learn that Gzeir Shava, where it says by both in the word law, so we learn that it has the same invalidations as a get isha.
Does that mean to say that a goy has no get of get when they separate from each other?
Right. Yeah, they have
physical separation.
Right. They don't. Right. They have that.
Whether or not it is or isn't,
no, there is an afkamina. There is.
Who cares?
No. Non-Jews do have bulas bal. They have a marriage. Right, but they do have the problem about agila rayas. They just have a different way of. The Rambam talks about what's like the way it used to be. But the point is that like when this is the wife, so then that's considered the wife. And when you send her out, she's not a wife anymore. But they don't have the Gitin, and by a Jew, you could send them out. She could be living who knows where and whatever. And you didn't see her for 10 years, still she's a wife because you need a get. But the non-Jews don't have that. So that's the exception to the law of the documentation. He says a few different things, shlichus and all these different things, and edus, they're all puzzle. All these different things are invalidations for a get. They saying they could do a kinyan, right? Right. But by ishus he's saying they don't have their kinyan, right? Something like that. That they only have bulas bal. They have the intimacy, this intimate relationship, but they're not going to have the kinyan on the isha, and it has many ramifications in machshava, whatever this that. They don't have that kinyan. Therefore, they're not supposed to be bolsh like a darka. There's a few different things that it's not their kinyan. The wife is not their kinyan versus Yisrael. Now, look at David Meir. Now, like according to the opinion of Meir, there's actually barba. There's actually 4 things that are similar. Gitin Daf, which is the Mishnah Daf Yomi on the base. Mishnah tells us over there this following machlekes, and we see Meir holds ho'imer 10 get zel ishti. Someone says, "Give this get to my wife," and v'shtar shichur zeh la'avdi, give this shtar shichur to my slave. Ratza, if the Baal wants lachzer b'shneim to back out by both of them before the shliach actually gives it to them, yachzi he can back out divrei Meir, because Meir holds that it's a liability and it's a loss for the ones that you're sending to, and since it's a chayiv, in chavon la'adam el b'fanav. In other words, a person cannot become an agent to a person that it should be a loss for that person unless you're making the person as a shliach, which is like as if it's in front of you. Whereas the Rabbanan disagree with Meir in the Mishnah over there on Daf Yomi, and they say that no, by shiur, you cannot back out once it's given over to the shliach, because even though the Eved did not make him a shliach, but they hold that it's a schutz for the Eved, that he leaves the domain of the master when he goes free, and therefore that's called zachan la'adam shlei b'fanav. You can marry the person not in front of him, because what's called anan tzadi, we would testify that he is pleased that this person is becoming a shlich for this, and therefore he would go free. Again, we'll see that machlekes in 2 dafim regarding if that's a schus or a liability for a slave to go free. But be that as it may, according to Rabbi, you have a 4th thing, that Gitin Daf is the same as Shecher Avadim, that if the Baal wants it, he can back out, because it's a chayv he holds for both of them. Now, the Gemara asks, Bishlam al Rabbanan, we understand according to Rabbanan, Minyana, the number that you're telling us, that there's 3 that they're similar, why are you saying a number? Because you want to exclude the case of Rabbi Meir to say that no, they're not similar in the 4th thing of Rabbi Meir of this about the Baal being able to back out. But Rabbi Meir, according to Rabbi Meir, why is he telling us that they're similar in 4 different ways? What are you coming to tell me with that? What are you coming to exclude? So the Gemara is coming to exclude this, what we learned in the following brisa, which is actually the opinion of the Tanakama, meaning he holds like the second opinion of Shimon Gamliel. He's coming to exclude from the Tanakama in this brisa to tell us that's not a 5th way that they're similar. What's this case? Eidim shein yodim lachtem. If you have witnesses that don't know how to sign, so what do? So mekaran lehem in your chalak. So the way Rashi actually says it, what you do is that you carve out with a knife on the piece of paper the names of the witnesses on a clean piece of paper, and then the witnesses come along and they fill up the carvings with ink, thus signing their name. Tosfos has a problem with this. That seems to be ksav al gab ksav. It was already. We'll see later on that even carving out is already writing. So it's already written. So you can't really write on top of writing. Tosfos says that's not a problem because it's not really writing. It's just carving, whatever. But Right, exactly. So then Taisus says, oh, well, if you do it in there, right, it depends if you, right, so that depends. Because Taisus brings from Rabbeinu Chanal another pshat, actually, it slipped my mind. What's that called when you take a piece of paper, a tracing paper, and they put a tracing paper, they make holes, because he says that the word of mekaren, according to Rashi, should have said mesartin, that you carve out. No, mekaren, you take a piece of paper on top and you tear, and what do you do with their that you they don't have a signature? He says no, you don't do it exactly. You leave some space, like a large space, and then they're filling in, so they're doing it according to their handwriting. But yeah, you leave them place where to trace inside, but so it's going to be precise to their, because there was a gap, there's a big space, so they're not going to do the whole thing. Be that as it may, so you do this tracing paper, or you carve into the thing, and they fill it in with ink. Now, Amr Shem Glili says, but when we say this halacha, is only begitin nashim, is only by a get for a woman. Why? Because we always try to do things for the aguna. We don't want the woman to be stuck without being able to get remarried. Because maybe the guy who's divorcing her, he's like, that's it, I'm leaving, I'm going on vacation today. Or he was in danger of his life, he's on his last leg in the hospital, he's in the ICU, and he wants that she doesn't have to go through the whole process of yibum until his brother comes, until he does, shlepa, he never got married, this guy's living out in the boondocks, until he comes, and she can be stuck. So that's when we met this kula that Adam did don't know how to sign. We were going to make you this a little Fisher Price, signing kit. We don't do that. The thumbprint. You have to know why we had this thing about chasima and not thumbprint. But Abu Shachri Avadim of a Shar Kol Ashtaris, but regarding the emancipation of the slaves and all other documents. If they know how to read and they know how to sign, then they could sign. We're not going to have them sign. So before we jump into the next part, so you see that's what Remeir was coming to, when we're saying for Remeir there's 4, he's coming to exclude a 5th one, because according to you see that Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg is differentiating, is saying that's only by Gitin Daf and not by shiur avadim, meaning to exclude from the Tanna Kama, who seems to be saying that shiur and get would have the same halacha, that you would tear the paper and let them sign inside. That's the case that we're excluding, that they're not the same in that. But the Gemara just parenthetically asked the question. It says, wait, Kriya Mandikar Shmei. You added on something that no one mentioned. Tanna Kama was talking about that they don't know how to sign. What's this? You're mentioning that if they know how to read and sign, then they sign. If not, then not. Well, who mentioned anything about reading? So the Gemara says, you're right. There's words missing, and this is what it should say. Regarding Gitin Nashim, we have 2 leniencies. If they don't know how to read, Karin Lefnehem, we read in front of them, which Tais explains that it has to be someone that's either 2 people or a very trustworthy person that's very afraid of lying, because when you have interpreters, something I always wondered, United Nations, whatever, and they have an interpreter who they must have some type of checks and balances, because who knows what this guy's saying. I'm sure there's a vetting process, whatever, but still. So the Karin Lefneim can't be just one regular random person. It's got to be a trusted source. So you read in front of them what says over here, and they sign. Now, if they don't know how to sign, then you tear this thing and you make it that it's convenient for them to sign. Again, but that's only a leniency, like we said, for Gitin Nashim, possibly shiur avadim. And again, that was the case that why Remeir said that there's similar in 4 ways to exclude this 5th case, that will only be Gitin Nashim, not shiur avadim, because it's only for a guna and not for that of the case of an eved. Now, the Gemara asks, really, v'suleka? Is that true that there's no other cases that Gitin Nashim and shiur avadim are the same? But there's a Mishnah Daf Gimel and Aleph. The Mishnah says, if someone says, here, give this get to my wife, and give this shtar to my slave, and he dies. So halacha is, lo yitnu la'achar misa. You can't give it after his death. Meaning, as Rashi explains, even according to the Rabbanan that they say shiur avadim is a schus, and halacha is zochad la'ad mishlei b'fanim, you can marry for a person even when he's not there. Rashi says an interesting spalt, an interesting differentiation. Although regarding the Eved meriting it, we say that once the Shlich has it, the Baal, the owner, cannot back out. But the Rabbanan agree, as long as the get did not get to the hand of the Eved, he's not freed. It's not a shlich l'kabbalah, it's a shlich l'halacha. Now, since he died first, so then it can't be a shiur. Why not? Because he doesn't have this permission anymore, because it's already in the rishus of the Yarshim. Right. Oh, he doesn't say that. I mean, I hear you're saying the words that Nansa denichale denahava hay shluchay lahachi. I hear you saying that. Interesting, yeah, the way the words are, that he's like his shliach for this. I hear. But the thing is that even if there would be the case, Rashi says, but until it gets to his hand, he's not freed. And the question is, why is that? Why is that? Is it possible that he wants him to be his? In other words, it's an interesting point, because you have to say he's making him like a shliach, because why can't the Baal be chayzer? Because no, he was already zeicha for the Eved. What?
It only works if the Edom HaKavana to be zeicha for the Eved.
The shliach?
Yeah.
If the shliach, what his intention is.
If he's not having Kavana to be zeicha for the Eved, so then he's not the shliach for the Eved.
You want to know what would happen if he explicitly is having in mind not to? Or do we assume that he's doing it? That's a good question. What's his intention?
He has Kavana to give it to the Eved.
Yeah, I guess you would have to know if it's an automatic or not.
No, but it's only if he has in mind to take it for the Eved.
He wants to know if it's automatic that or he has to have that kavana, or it's automatic. Well, that's how these on the Eved, that he would be pleased that he would be his shliach for that. Now, the thing is, it's obvious from Rashi that obvious from the halacha that there's some type of a differentiation over here, that although he's a shliach for the Eved, but he's still not freed, which is an obvious question. Why would that be? Why wouldn't he be freed the second that the shliach gets it? Because the Maisa is a shliach leilach. The Maisa, the husband, the Baal made him an agent to deliver it. Now, he can't back out because he's also the shliach of the Eved. But Rashi tells us that the shiur is not going to be until he actually gets it to his hands. The question is, why would that be actually? Why wouldn't he be freed the second it gets to the shliach? Because again, it's not shliach l'kabbalah, it's a shliach l'halacha. That's probably what it is. He didn't make him a shliach. So I nichale. Yeah, but you're not my hand. You're not benosim b'yada. You can't say that it's his emancipation, because he didn't appoint him as shliach. He's okay. He likes it. He was happy with it, but so you can't make it as if. Which is hard to understand, because the we say by Metzia, we say these types of things that is ready with Zeicha. But no, but I'm saying, but if she made him a shleich like a bala, for example, she would be a grusha before, right? So the question is, right? But if you say zachan la'adam shalei b'fanav, why are we only saying that it's like he can't back out anymore because he was zeicha by the Eved, but you say that he's not freed until it actually comes to his hand? That's you have to understand what that's svar, how that works. Why is it that he's not freed? Right. Let me say, but why wasn't he freed the second that the shliach got it? Right, but could he make himself a shliach? Right. 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 We're just wondering about this point about does he have to make him a shliach? You're saying he can't make himself a shliach. Right. Right. So the problem, the idea, right. 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 It would seem like that. Obviously, the point is that to be like a get, you have to actually make the person a shliach, and he can't just make himself a shliach. He could for monetarily purpose, and that the guy can't back out, but that for the actual shiur, it's not going to happen unless you made him a shliach and you made him an extension of your yad, or it actually gets to your yad. Right. So then it wouldn't. Then it wouldn't work. Then you didn't have. No, he would be able to back out because it wasn't even the zachal adam yet. Yeah, but it's only made him, but he didn't do the. Wasn't zeichin it yet. You have to actually pick it up and then be zeiche for the evid. L'chayr that in that case. Yeah, l'chayr in that case has to get to the hand of the shliach. So be that as it may, says the Gemara. So you can't give it after he died. Now, let's say he said Tunumana leplain yumeis. Let's say he said give 100 dinarim to that person and he dies. There yitnu lachabisa. They actually will give it after he dies. Why is that case? So it says Rashi because that's divrei shchimra. The words of a dying person is like kiksuvim the k'masurim dami. When a dying person says something, it's like it was written as like it was given over already. Because Rabbanan instituted that maybe his thoughts are going to become perturbed and it's going to make him more sick if he's not guaranteed that his words are going to be fulfilled. So therefore, it's a done deal regarding monetary purposes. But regarding shiur and get, that's not going to work if he dies before, and you're not going to give a lacha misa. But one thing is that you see, well, that's another thing, that get and shiur are different than all other documents. So why didn't you say that case too? Says, no, kikitani, when did we say regarding those 3 or 4 things that they're similar is only milsa de lesa b'shtar. It's only something that does not apply to any other documents. Milsa de isa b'shtar is something that applies to other documents. Lo kitani, we're not going to learn. As Rashi explained, this halacha applies by other documents. In other words, if let's say you give over a shtar matana to the shliach to give to someone else and he dies, you're not going to give it after he dies because there the acquisition of the land is only when you get the actual document, and that moment is already pakar reshus. Meaning, when you're shchimra, when you say give it, that's actually done. But when you actually give a document, it's actually worse off. It's not going to take effect until you actually give it. So therefore, it's a halacha that's not only by Gitin Daf, it's something that applies by other shtaros also. Says the Gemara, as we find, that the Shalach Ravin Mishmid Rabavo. Ravin sent Nimr Rabavo, Habayod, you should know, Shalach Rabbi Lazal Goyla Mishum Rabbein Nimr of our teacher Rav, Shchiv Merash Amar, a dying person that says, Kisvu Tinuman Laplain Yumeis, write and give this 100 dinar to that person and he dies, in case of an Eisen. You don't write and give it, because Shemala Gamalak Naisai. Maybe he only concluded that he wants to have the kinyan happen based on his command with the takana that Rabban instituted for Shchivmira. Maybe he only wanted El Bishtar. When the document gets to that person's hands, that he should acquire with the document. And that's why he made a document. The ain't star, but a document cannot be an acquisition la'achar misa after a person's death because it already removed the reshus of the one who's giving it, and therefore that's a case that would be similar to Gitin Daf, and therefore that's why we couldn't say it as another case that they're similar because it's not exclusive to them; it applies by other documents also. Says, okay, fine, but I have another question. I have a lishma, the halacha of lishma that Gitin Daf is similar to Shukra Avadim, and that's something that only applies to them. So why don't you say that? Says Bishlam the Rabbi, and according to Rabbi that he says that the whole takana of Meilcha maybe up saying b'fanei nacht was because it not became lishma. Maybe that was case number 1 we said of the similarity between Gitin Daf and Avadim. But Rabbi Kash, according to Rabbi, Meilcha maybe is because Eidin Tun Lekaimer. Lishma is a different halacha. Why aren't you saying that is another similarity between Gitin Daf and Avadim? V'sum Morba says the Gemara Ben LaRabba. I have another question. Like a mechuber is halacha of something attached to the ground, which is possible for both of them. Because the pasuk says in the Varm Chavdal, v'chasa b'nasan, it says v'chasa b'nasan, which means to say that you can only give a get that's only lacking writing and giving. That excludes this, which is attached to the ground, which you're also lacking detaching from the ground. And we know that we learn that the halachas of shichar abundant from Gitin Daf, from la. So why didn't you mention that as a case that they're similar? Says Gemara, no, kikitani, when did we learn? We only learn Pesula de Rabbanan, only when the rabbinic invalidations. The Raisa like Katani, when the biblical, we didn't learn it. So as Rashi explains, the case of Meilech Mevi, where the Rabbanan required you to say B'fanech, we really believe the Shliach. It's only rabbinically. And regarding the case of Eid Kuti, that's only a rabbinic invalidation of other documentations, because we presume that, unspecifically, that we're going to hold that they're invalid. But that's only because of a rabbinic concern. Regarding the secular courts, so the Gemara is going to ask very shortly that the secular courts is a biblical invalidation because the testimony of the non-Jews is not kosher because they're not in the category of Gitin and Kedushin. And the Torah says, V'chasa b'nasan, only someone that's in the category of giving a get is in the category of writing a get. as the Gemara explains in the second paragraph of Gimel Beis. So the Gemara is going to ask that. But all the cases that we mentioned were only rabbinic, not biblical. And the case you're asking of Mechubur and of Lishma are biblical problems. So therefore, we didn't mention that. What do you mean? One of the cases you mentioned about Karshal Abdikachavim, that we said that the differences between a regular document and the get and the shiur is regarding in the secular courts. The psul derais, so it's a biblical invalidation, but yet you learned that as the case that they're similar, that's going to be invalid. I thought you're not mentioning biblical invalidations. Says the Gemara, no, it's only rabbinic. How's it only rabbinic? Because we're talking about be'edei mesira. We're talking about where that the Mishnah that validates by other documents and invalidates by get and by shiur is where there's edei mesira. Like Rabbi Lazar, the Amar that he says edei mesira kart. He says, what's the primary thing of the creases of the get, of the severance of the relationship, is the witness that's given over in front of them, and you don't even have to sign on the get. When it says in the pasuk v'chasav, it actually means on the writing of the get and not on the signing of the witnesses. And the Mishnah is talking about where a Jewish scribe wrote the get, and the Mishnah is coming to tell us, so why is it apostle? Because Rabbi Lazar agrees what's called mezuyev mitoicha, when you have invalid witnesses sign on it, that's going to be apostle. So though it's valid because of the edei mesira, it's going to be apostle because of the witnesses that are signed in. Now that psul is only rabbinic, because that's a gezer because you might come to rely on these witnesses without edei mesira. And when Rabbi Lazar validates is when no one signed on it at all. So this psul actually is, in the secular courts, actually a rabbinic problem, because actually biblically is kosher with the edei mesira. It's only rabbinically possible because of mezuyev mitoicha. Says Gemara, wait a second, but Malikani Sefer, and the fact that the Mishnah in the Sefer, meaning the next Mishnah, Daf Yomi Beis, on the later Mishnah, says Rabbi Shimon Omer, he says, Af Elu, also these, meaning Gitin Nashim, are kasher and are valid with the signatures of the non-Jews, that they're going to be kosher. Rabbi Zer says, Yard, Rabbi Shimon L'Shitas Rabbi Lazar. He's going like the opinion of Rabbi Lazar, the Amar that it says, Eid Mesir Karti, that what creates the creases is the Eid Mesira, and therefore he validates it with Eid Mesira when it was written by a Jewish scribe. Well, the inference is the Tanakama Savalai. The Tanakama holds that they're not Karti, the Eid Mesira, only Eid Chasima. And then you're back to the question. If that's Reb Shimon who's disagreeing with our Tan of our Mishnah in the later Mishnah, that must mean that it's a psul deraisa because you're going Nalik Beleza. So on that the Gemara says, as you get into Yom and Aleph, no. Tanakama is also going in the Shita of Rebbe Lazar, and therefore, like we said, when you have these non-Jews witnesses, is only rabbinically invalid because you might come to rely on them and to give it over in front of them. But then what's Reb Shimon disagreeing with our Tanakama? The difference between them is when you have distinct names. I mean, Reb Shimon's coming to say that if the non-Jewish names are distinct names, that Jews are not called with those names, that's not mezoiv metoichai, because you're not going to come to rely on them, because you know that they're non-Jews. Where Rebbe Lazar agrees, where everyone knows when they're non-Jews, you're not going to come to rely on them without Eid Mesira, that's where he says, oh, it's going to be kosher. But our Tana also agrees that it's like Rebbe Lazar, Eid Mesira Karti. It's just that the difference is, will it be okay if you have distinct non-Jewish names? Then the Gemara asks, but if you're telling me that you're only counting rabbinic invalidations, that's the cases that you're saying that they're similar, but v'chazara. But regarding when you want to back out by both of them, according to Reb Meir, it's an invalidation that's deraisa. Why? Because since he's mevatel the shlichus of the shliach, comes out that he's not a shliach, there's no gerushin at all. That's biblical because the Torah says v'nasim b'yada, and here he's not giving it, not him, not his shliach. So, and still, Lukatani, still we're learning that that's a case where they're similar, regarding if you could back out or not, and that's going to be a biblical psul. So the Gemara falls off of this and says, Ella, you're right. When we had asked regarding the questions of, wait a second, we have more cases that they're going to be similar by Gitin Nosh Meshachar Avadim, that when it's attached to the ground, or regarding the Lach of Lishma, which, why didn't we count those cases? Don't answer like we said that we're not counting Psuli Deraisa, because you're right, you really do mention the case of Psul Deraisa, which is the case of Chazara backing out. Rather, Kikitoni, when did we say case that they're similar is Milsa de Lesa Kedushin, only something that doesn't apply by Kedushin. It's only for Gitin Nosh Meshachar Avadim. Milsa de Asi Kedushin, Loikatoni. A case that applied by Kedushin, we didn't learn. So, for example, Lishma, Mechuber, which applies also by Shtari Kedushin, because it says in the Varm Chavdal v'yatzim ebeisai, which he leaves his house, she gets married to someone else, which the Gemara later on the Pebeis says we compare Havaya Yitzi, we compare getting married to getting divorced. So it has the same halachas of lishma and of mechuber. Therefore, you can't say it that it's similar gitin nashma shir rabbanim because that also applies by kedushin. But by befana nechtav, that doesn't apply by kedushin because that's a rabbinic takana for just gitin because maybe the husband's going to contest and going to validate it. And also halach of eid kuti also is not kosher by kedushin because this that were validated by gitei nashim. The Gemara explains later on in Amud Beis. It's a very specific halacha because the edim by a get you can only sign when they're all present, which is not the case by other stars, including kedushin. So actually, it's only going to be a halacha for gitei nashma shachur avadim that we're going to have that leniency. And arkayis also doesn't apply by kedushin, where you have edim misira that are Jews, because the gezer is only by a get and by shichur, because you might come to rely on them and you will require another get. But by kedushin, says Rashi, since biblically she's engaged because of the edim misira, even if you're going to say that she's not engaged. If you say she's not going to be engaged, so you're going to permit a Esha Shish La'alma, it says whatever different svara that there's no concern that you're going to run into any problems. Sal Kapanim, we're only saying things that apply by Gitin and not by Kedushin. Says but what do you mean? The case of backing out is itself by Kedushin because if you give over a star Kedushin to his agent, he wants to back out, so he backs out because there's no schus over here because he's making her forbidden to everyone else. And because of this star, he's not being mechayiv in the mezainis yet. So there's no. So it should be the same thing that applies by kedushin too. Says the Gemara, interesting answer, which Taisus has arichas on this. But b'shlichus bal karcha, we're talking about an agency that he could coerce, which the begerish and isa b'kedushin lesa. In other words, by gitin, it can be similar to gitin. You can't have the same similar case by kedushin because this shliach that sent to her to divorce her could do it bal karcha. So to by Eved, he could emancipate his slave against his will. By Kedushin, you cannot become a shliach bal karcha of a woman. So therefore, that's what the Bryce is saying. We're saying that this is similar Gitin Nashma Shircha Avadim, that this shliach, who could be a shliach bal karcha, if the husband wants to back out, he can back out. Whereas by Kedushin, where even though he could back out, it's still not similar because you can't make a shliach bal karcha. So it's really, according to the way Rashi is explaining the technicality, it has more of an arichas on this. But yeah, no, so I'm saying, so that's just to end off, that's how the Gemara is coming out, that when we're saying it's only three things that are similar to Gitei Nashim Shachur Avadim, only things that don't apply by Kedushin, but let's say the Shema and Mechuber applies, versus the three cases, as Rashi explains, that only apply by Gittin and Shechur. And what's the case of Chazar, which is one of the cases, says, yeah, but you don't have a Chazar in the case of where the Shlich is Bal Karcha, that's, again, only by Gittin and by Shechur, and you wouldn't have that by Kedushin. Thank you to anytime for hosting us.